We've all heard it. The era of the great American city is over. City life is too expensive. It's too inconvenient. It's too dangerous. And these days, with fewer of us than ever tethered to an office, why put up with the hassle? We don't need cities anymore. That's the story, anyway. And it's almost certainly wrong. America is a nation that offers a wide array of lifestyles. The tranquility of the countryside, the family-friendly confines of the suburbs, energy and dynamism of our major cities. And when it comes to that last one, we've always been a little conflicted. Because America's cities are undoubtedly one of the secret ingredients of the nation's success, but also there's a proud American tradition of hating on them. In the earliest days of the nation, Thomas Jefferson thought that urban life was corrupted and that it was essential that the U.S. be made up of independent farmers like himself out in the countryside. Now, on the one hand, you can kind of see where that vision came from. At the time of the first census, after all, only about 5% of Americans lived in cities. On the other hand, however, most of those farmers probably weren't living like Thomas Jefferson. But at the same time that Jefferson was dreaming of an agrarian nation, his rival, Alexander Hamilton, was arguing that America's future was urban, that the key to the country's prosperity would be cities that were hubs of industry and commerce. And all due respect to TJ, Hamilton won this one. Pick your example: New York and finance, Houston and energy, the Bay Area and tech, New Orleans and reasonable grounds for divorce. Over time, America did in fact become the urban nation that Hamilton dreamed of. By 1870, a quarter of the population lived in urban areas. By 1920, a majority did. And in 2020, a full 80% of Americans were city dwellers. And it's not hard to see why. By the early days of the 21st century, America's cities were on a hot streak. Crime had fallen dramatically. A higher proportion of Americans than ever before were living in America's biggest urban centers. And by 2017, just our 25 biggest metros alone were producing over 50% of the nation's GDP. And then, well, you know what happened next. With the onset of the COVID pandemic, city centers emptied out. Big swaths of the labor force started working remotely. A lot of people decided to leave cities altogether. And all of a sudden, all your friends' Instagram feeds started looking like this. Some of America's most iconic urban centers saw huge population declines. Manhattan lost nearly 6% of its population in a single year. San Francisco lost nearly 7%. Pretty soon, some analysts began worrying about an urban doom loop, in which cities with empty offices and storefronts would see increasing crime and homelessness, causing even more people to flee and taking with them the tax dollars that could help to turn the city around. But here's the thing about America's love affair with cities: it's a lot harder to kill than that. For one thing, a lot of the people who left big cities during the pandemic just ended up in other big cities, with huge population gains in places like Austin, Phoenix, Raleigh, and Las Vegas. For another, a lot of these effects are starting to look short-lived. By 2024, the Census Bureau was reporting the population declines in places like LA, New York, and Chicago were slowing down. In San Francisco and DC, the local population had actually begun growing again. And if it seems like Americans just can't quit urban life, there's a good reason for that. Cities are our species' greatest invention. That's the verdict of the Harvard economist Edward Glaeser in his book Triumph of the City, which argues that if we just think of cities as concentrations of tall buildings, gridlocked freeways, or crowded subway cars, we're missing the bigger picture. Cities are people. Here's what he means. While it's true that density is a word we often associate with inconvenience, having that many individuals living in close proximity to each other turns out to be one of the secrets of the nation's success. In the year 2018, for instance, the GDP of just the Chicago metro area was equivalent to the entire nation of Switzerland. LA was equal to Indonesia. New York City was equivalent to Canada. One of the reasons that big cities fuel so much of America's economic growth is that the more people you have around, the more opportunities there are for people to develop specialties that a rural or small town economy could never support. And being surrounded by lots of different people trying lots of new things is also a recipe for innovation. Research has found that over 1/5 of patents cite older patents from the same metropolitan area, which sort of makes sense. If you work in biotech, you're going to be surrounded by a lot more new ideas in Boston than you are in South Dakota. If you're making movies, you'll find a lot more potential collaborators in Hollywood than in Arkansas. And this is a big part of the reason why our cities are so essential. Because as much as technology may have liberated us from our desks, it hasn't liberated us from the importance of collaboration and human interaction. Research has found that while remote work may be convenient, it also robs many people of the kinds of personal connections that are essential for their careers. Junior employees have fewer opportunities to be mentored. They get less feedback from managers, and they're deprived of the kinds of spontaneous office interactions that lead to professional creativity or personal friendships. You can't network in your living room. Bottom line, yes, America's cities are navigating some tough times, but the reports of their demise are premature because we're always going to need places to fuel innovation. We're always going to need places to drive economic growth. And we're always going to need the spark that comes from human connection. Okay, some of those sparks may be slightly more valuable than others.